Welcome to my review of the Rockford Files Season 1, Episode 5, Tall Woman in Red Wagon, written by Roy Huggins and Stephen J. Cannell, and directed by Jerry London. This episode marks the first time an answer phone message actually relates to something in the show, as it states a spot has opened up in the trailer park for Jim's mobile home, and the trailer subsequently moves to the location it would remain at for the rest of the series. The episode begins with Jim and two others digging up a coffin, something that apparently doesn't concern Jim nearly as much as it does the two guys he's paid to do the digging.
This is a crime against nature. It's called,
grave robbing. Keep digging.
Just as Jim manages to raise the coffin with his mobile winch,
oh, look at this. He's got a fold-up winch.
two armed men rush him, and one of them shoots him. But what do they want with an empty coffin? And will Jim survive getting shot in the head? Well, we'll have to wait to find out, as the rest of this story is told in flashback. This is certainly an original way to open the show, as this is the most serious we've seen Jim injured. Although it doesn't quite manage to sell him getting shot in the head, it feels like they should have made a bit more effort to construct an injury that looked as serious as it is. This one clearly is very serious, but doesn't really look it. When we do flashback, we meet Sandra Turkle, played by Sian Barbara Allen, who Columbo fans will recognise from Lovely But Lethal as the blackmailer turned second victim of makeup murderer Vivica Scott. Sandra wants to hire Jim to find a woman named Charlotte Dusky, and is quite a character.
Hey, don't mind me. I'm a little pushy. I'm a real turnoff at first. But you'll get to like me eventually. I'll grow on you.
She's a journalist and a bit of a control freak, which is certainly at odds with Jim's far more laconic style.
What I need you for is to kind of go along with me in case there are some really kind of dangerous types, and you can take care of them for me.
Take care of them?
Yeah.
Rockford finally and reluctantly agrees to Sandra's terms, and they head to Elmira, where Charlotte was last seen. But they are followed by Harry Stoner, played by George DeCenzo, perhaps best known as Lorraine's father in Back to the Future.
He's all right, thank God.
What were you doing in the middle of the street, a kid your age?
This entire introduction to Sandra and the case is handled with a very light touch, and plenty of back and forth between Sandra and Jim, harkening back to the screwball comedies of the past, like Garner's own Move Over Darling. This gentle banter comes to an abrupt halt when the manager at the hotel Charlotte was staying in tells them she died of a heart condition a few days earlier. Sandra refuses to believe it, so Jim agrees to continue investigating. They check with the doctor, who pronounced her dead, and discover the body was claimed by her cousin, but neither are particularly convinced by the doctor's story.
I don't like him.
Neither do I.
Their next stop is the town's train station, where Jim reveals one of his go-to PI gimmicks as he produces a business card printing machine to make a dummy business card to scam information with.
The whole secret of a good confidence game is having the right props.
It's easy to forget that at this time not only was there very little photo ID, but that people trusted you if you were official enough to have a business card. He prints himself off a card for the funeral home and finds out from a station manager where Charlotte's coffin was sent, or at least is pointed in the right direction. Fed up of their tale, Jim pulls off a dramatic move to end it by reversing into Stoner, which might have been a mistake as he's an IRS agent.
U.S. Treasury Department, IRS. I keep meaning to get that gear shift fixed.
Who is also looking for Charlotte. She is apparently a gangster's moll who owes the government a large amount of unpaid taxes after the gangster died, and she ran off with some of his ill-gotten gains. As this is now an active case, Jim tells Sandra he wants nothing more to do with it. Well, that's not exactly true, as he calls the son of the dead gangster and finds out that Harry Stoner is no Fed, but accidentally gives away his location to the gangster's son.
Amtrak eastbound 705 Vista Liner to Asserton, Ashview, and South.
Jim then lets Stoner get on the train, and he and Sandra also get on the train and con the conductor into giving them information they need about the coffin, and also convince him to help them with Stoner.
Mr. Stoner is an outpatient from Fairview. He's suffering from a peltomus symptom with malaria sympaticus.
After taking Stoner out, they take off in a cab just before two mob goons show up, and Sandra and Jim head to the cemetery to find out if it really was Charlotte in the coffin. Which of course it isn't. It's 3 bags of dirt.
I got a jar of dirt, I got a jar of dirt, and guess what's inside it?
What's nice about this story is that the mystery continues to build over time. What begins as a missing persons case quickly escalates to a faked death, stolen mob money, a race for that money, and the mysterious past of Charlotte Dusky. It all evolves very naturally, so that you still don't really know what's going on or why Jim was digging up the coffin at the beginning, having now seen him open the unburied casket, but remains to not ever be confusing. Jim and Sandra trace the address of the cousin given to the funeral home and find Charlotte on the floor of her house, but she's still alive, so they get her to the hospital, somewhere Charlotte should be familiar with, as she's played by Susan Damante, who appeared as the nurse in Columbo Troubled Waters.
I thought I was gonna die.
She explains that she did take the money, but that her dead mobster lover told her she could have it. Not that it matters now, because the mobster's son has stolen it back. There's then a somewhat melancholic scene as Sandra asks Charlotte to come back with her.
I figure that you will bring all the eligible bachelors within range so I can have a better shot at picking out a nice one.
Having spent all this time with Sandra, it's really quite sad to see her have such low self-esteem when it comes to her looks, when she's so forceful in her personality. She's far from ugly, and yet is convinced she's not a looker. Thankfully, Jim knows what to say to boost her ego, and does so with his trademark humour.
Are you eligible?
For everything but marriage.
As he and Sandra leave the hospital, arguing over his fee, he tells her he thinks Charlotte is lying about losing the money, which brings us to the cemetery where we began. Jim's injury and his own hospital stay. As he leaves the hospital and gets in his car, he's joined by Harry Stoner, this time armed and wanting the money. But Jim doesn't have it. He tells Stoner the mortician from the cemetery must be the one who stole it, which Stoner believes, and when he gets back to his trailer and finds Sandra there, wanting to hire him to find Charlotte again, he tells her the same thing, also convincing her, leaving him to ponder where the money really is.
I wonder where the hell that money really is.
This is a really complicated but solid story, with a very different mystery to the last episode. As the mystery unfolds in front of us, and is complex enough not to require a subplot, we go on this journey with Rockford, finding out what he does when he does, and we are also left as baffled as he is as to where the money is. This ending could feel a little satisfactory, as nothing is really wrapped up, and the situation ends pretty much where it began. and yet there's a certain amount of comfort to be had in that. Going on this adventure which sees the detective just as clueless to the answer as we are. There are a couple of things that don't really work when you think about it, such as why Charlotte gave her real address to the mortician, or why Jim thought the money was in the casket, when if that was the case, it would have been impossible for Charlotte to retrieve it at a later date. But these are pretty insignificant to the overall story, and not really worth getting hung up on. All in all, it's an imperfect but fun little romp, and I would have loved to have seen more of the Sandra character, as I thought Alan and Garner had really good chemistry. 4 out of 5 for me. Thank you. Goodbye.